I'd like to invite the wisdom of all of our ancestors to join us in the journey that we're on together. So thank you for joining me in a moment of pause, and let's take a couple of deep breaths together from all over the world. We'll just be breathing together. So I'm going to invite us to take an inhalation after I count to 3. We'll just inhale together and take 3 breaths together. So on the count of 1, 2, 3, take a big inhalation. Exhale. Inhaling again and exhaling. Inhaling, exhaling together. And coming into our Zoom room. Thanks again for doing that with me. Here at Landwell, we find that when we're entering into a gathering of whatever team, whatever size, that it's a sacred threshold we're crossing, and that it actually warrants a pause to ground in, to center ourselves into transition from whatever we've been doing into really bringing our excellent attention to each other. And so we also, when we come into meeting, after we have a centering, we do something called voice in center. And I'm challenged to know how to do that inside of a Zoom room with 129 people. But just, you know, even if for a moment, if we could all just say one word, you know, unmute yourself. It'll sound like a cacophony of benedictions, but just unmute yourself and say one word of what you're bringing into this meeting that we're in together right now. So,
passion,
freedom, honor,
joy,
and
excitement,
trust,
energy.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that. It was fun to hear even the clips of hope and trust and energy, all of that. So thank you. Okay, so I am going to, the way this is going to happen today is that I'm going to do a little bit of screen sharing, but not that much. I am very saturated in my work and in my community and family life right now, as I'm sure many of you are, and under the shelter-in-place circumstances. And I don't have like a big slide presentation, so I'm going to bring in a couple of slides that help me just continue to enter in to what I'd like to share, and then I'm going to talk for a little while. I'm just gonna let you all in on what's really moving for me right now and what I'm seeing in our movement. And then we'll transition into talking with each other. So you can, Cynthia's gonna help me manage the chat, and maybe Neil too. So if there's particular questions that start to arise for you, and you are, or you're coming in with a bunch of questions, that's awesome. You can put those into the chat. If people are having, as I'm talking, if there are things that you're really responding to and you want to hear me talk more about those pieces as I bring them up, then Jimmy, just write that into the chat. And so we're going to organically keep track of your responses in this way. And then when I feel like I've kind of emptied out, we'll have hopefully plenty of time to capture some of what's alive for you. So that's how it's going to go today. So as Cynthia said, I became a real estate agent 15 years ago, and I never thought that I would be grow up to be a real estate agent, because I personally don't actually believe that the land can be owned. And so it seems a little bit, you know, out of sorts to then go into a business that is based upon transacting, from my perspective, stolen land. And so it's, you know, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance inside of the practice of real estate. And it's what's happening right now. So there is a market layer above our sacred earth. We have turned her into a commodity, and temporarily, and with a lot of legal fiction. We have a major design challenge to work with the situations that we're inheriting, and to convert them into the future that we all are likely called to, because we're on this call today. And so so just really working with real estate as it is. I went in and I became a real estate agent, and transacted land. And you can't go into a business like real estate with just a bunch of activist idealism and decide you're going to start making communities. So I knew I had to actually become a real estate agent, and I did. And in so doing, I learned a lot, and ended up getting to bend my practice more and more towards the service of cooperative stewardship, and different scales of people, different scales of groups working to share land and property together, and housing in various shapes and sizes. So right now, after 15 years of doing that, I'm in a professional transition, and I am doing less of the actual real estate, and my partner Erica, who has Green Key Real Estate in the Bay Area. So if you're in the Bay Area, and we do have a real estate practice, I do less of the agency, because after having all of this experience that I've had, I feel really called to help on a movement level. So I'm working on projects that are that are really trying to set up larger scale platforms to help convert more land and help more people who don't perhaps have some of the privilege and luxury that we may have on this call to spend the time figuring out how we're going to do this. So that's what I'm doing with a lot of my time right now. So, but first I want to show you a picture of where I live, and let me see here. So I am very blessed to live with, here we go, sorry. To live with this grove that you can see here. There's a grove of elder trees, of oak and buckeye and Oregon ash. We live on this creek, and we live with this mugwort patch right here. And you notice I'm not showing you all the houses. There are 7 dwellings on this house, up kind of where this photo, this down across the valley is taken. And it's very much a unicorn type of a property, in that it is 22 acres with 7 legal dwellings, and that is actually 6 legal dwellings. And that's quite a rarity. What's also quite a rarity is that there is a living body of water that we have that we are stewards of, a grove of trees on the edge of some wild here that are actually what I believe make all of the human stuff possible. So it's my experience that having an imprint like these trees, and that to go sit in and listen to, is actually what makes what we're attempting to do on the human level possible. And so I'm a big advocate that even if the lands that you're working with and living with, even if it's urban, if you don't have direct access with the land that you're living with to something that reminds you that you are part of something much larger in a natural world, that you source a lot of your work through a natural environment like this. And I have a particular affinity with this plant, mugwort, and I get the opportunity to wild tend mugwort, and that is she's one of my greatest teachers. And so I think, it's interesting because I get to go be a real estate agent and kind of pose as somebody who's, like just somewhat straight, at least. But underneath it, I am, you know, I'm a witch just learning how to listen to the plants and trees again. And, you know, and I just don't even feel like mincing words about that anymore. And it's a real lost art. And I feel that it's being regained and it's rewoven, and human beings learning how to listen to the earth that we are living with and is alive and speaking to us, learning how to actually be in a deep and reciprocal and humble relationship with the land is one of our prime directives right now. And it's hard to do that from like a prime directive kind of production oriented kind of way. It actually means you have to slow down and listen. And so we put it in our legal contracts here at Landwell. The Grove is written into our legal agreements with each other. We have to go sit in the Grove at certain times in our decision-making processes. We have to go and listen to those trees. We have committed to ourselves that that is part of our process. And so I feel that right now in the world, we are facing such radically horrible and intense circumstances that it's going to take root level solutions and shifts to how we're being in order to help solve these challenges. And so there's movements like the rights of nature movement. There's ways that we as humans right now are really learning that we are at our wits' end at like figuring out with our brains how to, quote, solve our problems, and that learning how to listen and really bring in a degree of humility in our partnership with place is really going to be what's going to help us like create a future that is healthy. and so I'm very inspired by this grove. I want to show you one more picture. Oops, let me see. Does it go like that? There we go. So this is a buckeye tree. These are the oak trees in the grove. And this is not just a buckeye tree. It's truly a being. Like this, you meet this tree and it, you know, it like shifts your consciousness. And so if you let it. So we're learning how to use fire in the grove. And that is what the First Nation people who live here, they knew how to use fire. And now Sonoma County, year after year, is under siege of wildfires because people haven't learned how to work with the elements. And so we're learning how to bring fire back to the grove, to bring the smoke up to the trees. It helps with the trees' health and the mycelium, which of course helps with the health of the trees as well. And so here's a bunch of the kids that I live with, and teaching them how to live in circle, teaching them how to really listen to each other. Of course, these are our inspirations. And so learning how to be people who think beyond our lifetimes, and not just our children's lifetimes, but their children's and into the generations to come. Okay, I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen for the moment, which you told me how to do this. Okay, there we go. Cynthia, without losing my, my place. Okay, cool. How's everybody doing? Can I get a, okay, sweet. It's so weird to be inside of a technological space like this. Just keep talking. Okay. Okay, so what I am wanting to move with you all today is, well, first I want to say that I think that COVID is really bringing up the reality that where you're sheltered and who you're sheltered with and where your food comes from is like of utmost importance. And I have a feeling that the movement that and I want to just claim that I'm not sure if this resonates for all of you, but I really do believe that we are a movement of people So I would love to just be able to talk about that. Like, you are all part of the movement. I'm part of the movement. We are part of a cultural repair movement, and it's a big arc of time, and it takes us working on lots of different fronts, but that we're part of a movement. And so I do think that in some ways the gravity shift of COVID is going to fuel this movement with some really big reality checks. And I anticipate that that there's going to be a lot of us trying to find ourselves in places with people doing this work. And so, you know, coherence is a word being used a lot inside of the circles that I travel in. And one of the reasons why I think we're using coherence is because we're actually trying to make sense. We're trying to have something that actually makes sense to us. And so the incoherence in our world, these communities that we're creating, I think they attempt to be islands of coherence, like where we're trying to find a place that we can wrap our minds and hearts around. We can find people that we're willing to dedicate to doing the work with, and then we can go deeper and deeper into the creation of something that is coherent, that has integrity. And so the one of the patterns that I feel like is happening here is it's a pattern of wholeness. And so we're community is attempting to be, in many ways, to create something that's whole. It has parts, and it has a wholeness, and so then we put ourselves into that as people, and we've got all of our stuff of how whole do we actually feel as people, how integrated are our parts internally, and we put ourselves into circles and teams of other people to create or to live in community together, and it sort of mimics this pattern of striving towards wholeness. And that's one of the reasons why the land is such an important piece, because I think we're also really turning to the land and trusting and realizing that nature does have a coherence. We may not always be able to understand it, but often when we sit and listen, it reveals itself. The patterns reveal themselves to us. And a lot of us are inspired to mimic our designs and patterns with and as nature, remembering that we are nature ourselves. And so there's a really strong pattern towards wholeness that I feel that we're in. And that is just, I think, a really helpful frame. So I think a lot of what I'd like to be bringing in here at the beginning of while I'm talking and before we start talking are some frames, like some frames of how to look at the complexity that is the endeavor of land-based community, because it is absolutely a complex endeavor. You have people coming from multiple different walks of life and personal experience, levels of trauma, levels of wealth, levels of exposure to different forms of diversity, different tool sets. You have people coming from all sorts of different places, you know, literally and figuratively, and then desiring to create something that actually breaks social norms, breaks a tremendous amount of social norms, those of which that we can point to and say, I don't like that, but I don't, you know, that capitalism or wealth disparity or, you know, all those things. But then when it comes to actually solving those problems yourself within your circle, it is a huge endeavor. And so we're working against something that's crumbling, and we're still often dependent on it for how we're making our money and how we're getting our books and food, and you know all the like systemic pieces. We're still dependent, and we're on this long bridge towards evolving ourselves into a future that we hope is more coherent and life affirming. And so you may be here because you think big like this, and you may be loving this and being like, yeah, totally, that's what we're doing. And you may also be like, you know, cool, you're a real estate agent, can you just tell me how to acquire land? And so I'm going to spiral into that, and we can certainly go there. But I just, you know, I have spent so much time with people at the threshold of making the connection with land, that that I find that people who have really thought about it and spent time connecting with the land and connecting in circles of people for a long time, and get that it's a continuum, that the journey that we're on, that this is a life's work. This is a body of practices that are just going to continue and to develop in your life if you continue to pursue this path. And it's really going to be a learning journey. so the more that we can kind of get some good framing on, so that we enter into that learning journey with our expectations set in a good place, the more successful we're going to be. Because a lot of communities fail, I think, because they put their idealism first, and rather than the actual reality of what it means to mend and repair relationship with people. And so there's a phrase that we use at Landwell that we say, composting idealism. And because our idealism is a beautiful motivating force, and it's also something that that can kick us in the ass over and over again when we juxtapose and judge what we think should be happening inside of our groups and our communities, how we think we should be being or other people should be being, or how it's supposed to be. That can be super challenging for the success of your community. And so composting in learning as a group how to actually do that is super important. And what does that mean to actually come together as a group of people to name the vision and the values that are calling you together? Because it's super important what it is, those ideals and visions and values, to name those. I often see those as the apex above the group. Like, I'll see the group as a circle, and I'll see the apex of the top of us is that story that's really uniting us, and that vision that is our shared vision. And it's so important to identify that and to come together around that, and then to realize that sometimes that's going to have come from our minds or even our egos or our sense of, again, like a place that we will need to also let go of, because the bottom part of that axis of the circle is the earthen home that we are actually doing the work with. And so sometimes, that idealism doesn't match reality. And so how do you keep alive that which is inspiring you, and keep cultivating a vision that compels you and regenerates you as you do the work, and also be willing to cycle it through and let it go, and compost, like return it back into the earth, so that you can have a true, like a regenerative energy about your community. And I'll say one of the primary pattern challenges for us as Western modern people, which I assume most of us are, is that we're very driven towards progress. And we totally think that there's things that we need to accomplish, and there's structures, both social structures and physical structures, that we need to build, and infrastructure that needs to be fixed. And all of that is really, really true. And we tend to overemphasize with our minds on the progress of building sort of like the different layers of the architecture, because it's where we, I think, imagine we have the most control and the most power to affect change. And for those of you who have lived in community and have gone through what is the inevitable initiation cycles that community brings us into, and that's the thing that another really strong pattern is a process of personal and collective initiation that's happening in our personal lives and then also in our groups, is that we have we come to that table with all of that verve and enthusiasm and ideas for how we're going to structure it and what we're going to do. And at the end of, you know, no, I don't want to say at the end of the day, but yeah, kind of at the end of the day, like there's a whole lot that we don't know that we don't know. There's a whole lot of mystery that we haven't learned how to listen to and to incorporate into our structures. And that's why we put the Grove, partially, that's why we put the Grove into our legal contract, is to try to bridge the mystery, the holding of that seat. You know, sometimes we'll sit in important meetings and we'll have an empty seat. You know, it's the voice that's not there, the voice of the marginalized people, the voice of the trees, the voice of the children, the voice of the elders, the voice of we don't know. And so I think that's so challenging for us as Western-minded, accomplishment-oriented. You did good when you got the A, when you accomplished the task. Like, we come to this work in this very you know, even if we can't see it, you know, I know that there's lots of ways that I, for sure myself, have thought, oh no, I am totally an emergent person. I can roll with, you know, anything that comes up. But the truth is that there's lots of ways that I'm seeking to control for my own safety. And so I think that this is just a really important piece for us to be looking at, is how do we do that culture bridging work that is is the work of creating community, to where we learn how to cycle as a group. We learn how to put something up, decide it's what the best, you know, we have another saying here, we say it comes from sociocracy, safe enough for now, good enough to try, or good enough to try, safe enough for now, something like that. And we actually just say Geffen set, good enough for now, safe enough to try. Okay, that's Geffen set. Let's try that. Let's go for that. But let's for sure, and this is, we continually have to work on this. Let's for sure work on the feedback loop. Like, what's the feedback loop? Because the thing that drives a lot of people crazy is that we have to slow down. We have to continually slow down in order to become cyclical people, and to become people who are, like, the coherence requires cyclicity, and cyclicity requires going around the bend from that direction oriented place and circling back and saying, how did that go? How was that for you? You know, this is a stitch in the weave. It's really challenging. I attest to it. We just want to keep going with, like, what's exciting, what's next. And that exact action has had us on a meta level never go back and actually heal the wounds upon which the United States is built on, you know. So when we're addressing, when we really want to bring our ideals and our ethics into land-based community, we are actually facing the world work of our times called stolen land and stolen labor. And how, for those of us who are sensitive beings and are wanting to be, like, truly inclusive in our work, that means often in our communities, we're actually then needing to ask ourselves, what, if we're repairing, how deep do we take this? What does repair actually look like if we're doing the world work inside of our communities? How deep can we take that repair with the land, with the indigenous peoples, with the people who do not have the privilege to undertake the community experiment that we're working on? And so that's a question that we have to continue, I think, You know, you may feel differently, but I feel if we don't take that to heart, then we're not actually like there's plenty of ethics that I think we would really love to believe that we were identified with, that we're actually leaving at the door when we cross that threshold into creating land-based community. We're going to leave a bunch of people still out. And I'm not saying you have to get everybody into all of your communities, but I do believe we need to ask the questions. And so there are people in my community, for instance, who are really important voices who continue to call us to the task of seeing our whiteness, of learning how to address the privilege that we have in 22 acres, Sonoma County, like we're quote living the dream. It's really hard to do it for sure. And how do we address the big questions of our time with the people we're with in the places we're in, and really take it to heart. And so yeah, how is all this landing? What's the response we're getting in the chat? Yeah.
Yeah, there's some really great things that have come into the chat. Someone said, I believe that the difference between initiation and trauma is integration. Integrated trauma, it leads to more wholeness and initiation. And yeah, and I think there's a lot of people who are also curious about more about the legal aspects and buying land, and there's so many great takeaways, but maybe also having time for questions soon.
Sure.
How do you feel about that, Cassandra?
No, I feel good. I'm going to say, just since we're going to go into the land piece, I would like to say a few pieces that are really important with regard to the land, and that is that for those of us, before I started landing about 15 years ago into place, I had such a yearning. It was like so intense. It was like, get me back to the land. Like I was like, part of me was missing. And I feel that drives a lot of people. And as a real estate agent, it's really sexy to go out looking for land, because you get to meet incredible places and you get to imagine your life, in these places. And it's so important to have that experience. And I think it's really important to realize that this trauma that we have of our severed relationship with place drives sometimes a desperation. And that desperation can cause us to make decisions really quickly that then, we may create a beautiful mess, which is totally part of starting intentional communities with land, is sort of creating a beautiful mess together. And then, pardon my French, but unfucking the situation. But that's a really common pattern. And because we're yearning for land. And so, the land often comes up and grabs us too. Something shows up and we're like, oh my gosh, that's the most, that's what happened with us here at Land. Where we're like, oh my gosh, we have that land, that's it. So we have to do whatever we can, hustle, get all the funds together, do the thing, get over the threshold, get the land, and then we'll sort it out, after you basically it's like jumping into bed together and getting married, like really fast, and then figuring out whether you can actually have a long-term relationship. But it's, it's our yearning to get home can drive a lot of choices to get with the land. And so I can talk about how to work with that. And one of the things I'd really love to say is that start acknowledging your yearning, like if you can, with land right now. Start healing if you haven't already. I'm imagining a lot of you have, but really healing that sense of belonging to and as Earth from where you're at right now. Many clients I've worked with who are willing to go there with me, I said, start making an offering to the trees that are closest to you you're closest to where you're living with right now. Start talking to those trees, making offerings to those trees, and letting those trees be part of your journey home to their cousins, and like open yourself up to that mystery seat inside of your practice of finding land now. Like, don't just go on the MLS. Start looking, you could do that, but also like, begin that direct relationship. Because it's a continuum, and the place that Cynthia's lived in a couple of different communities, and so have I, and it may not be the community that you form or join now, may not be the one you're living in 10 years. So it's a continuum. Your relationship with the land is a continuum, and to just realize that you're already in that continuum right now. So that was one piece that I wanted to bring. I would also say that there's some strategies relative to acquisition of land that I would just share, patterns that I've recognized. When you go to actually get into contract and quote buy land together, it can be, I call it the bottleneck of acquisition. Some of you have heard my talks, may have heard me say this before. It is a bottleneck of acquisition because the joy and the excitement of it all can start really big, but when it comes to actually putting the funds together, deciding on legal structures, and deciding on land, people start popping out of that birth canal because it gets intense, it gets contractual, the rubber quote meets the road, and all the stuff that you start, that you're all like enthusiastic about becomes more and more real. And that is exciting, and it also will push people out of the process. And so I think being prepared for that, I think that as the smallest group that is larger than a couple, like 3+, but 3 to 6 is probably like the sweet spot in terms of a group going through an acquisition process, depending upon what your long-term goals are. But I would say that for a lot of them, like a 3 to 6 person group is the ideal size. And there's plenty of exceptions I could name, but there's a lot to that size of group, and the level of intimacy, the level of trust that you can build within that size of group, the amount of people that you can actually keep track of and understand and like really know, and while you're also doing the rest of your busy life. And so we can talk about that, in just a minute when we open up. We can talk about why that, but you can open up again, of course, after you go through that acquisition kind of birth canal bottleneck. And I shouldn't say bottleneck, because bottleneck like stops energy. Maybe it's just more about like, contracting down into a small functional group, and then opening up again, and then inviting people back in according to your membership process, which in and of itself is a whole thing that you have to, I would advise you pay very much attention to. And okay, there's so much that we can talk about. So I'm super stoked to talk about different legal forms, the form that we've taken here at Landwell for the moment. It's a transitional legal situation that we're in right now. I'll go ahead and answer that question because I'm guessing it's a question. And the legal forms that are the most flexible for the most projects, the legal form is, if you're in the US, and I'm not sure what it's like in other countries, is the LLC. And so the LLC allows for different amounts of people to have different amounts of money. It allows you to have different amounts of money and membership shares and it allows you to not necessarily tie that to the number of votes that you have. And so you can disaggregate that relationship between the amount of money that you bring into the project with the decision-making power that you have. And so that's an important form. We have 2 LLCs here at Landwell. We have a Founders Group LLC that is doing the cooperative stewardship of the whole project, and then we have a title holding LLC, and we have a very beautiful, complicated but not too complicated, and we can talk more about this, but we have a lease to own agreement between the title holding LLC and the stewarding LLC, and we're able inside of that framework to bake in our values and intentions into how we're transitioning the land and the equity and the decision making. We often think of it as the central fire. The stewardship LLC is tending the central fire of the land, and so we don't anticipate that an LLC is our long-term stewardship model, however. So we are anticipating a transition into some form of trust, and we sometimes entertain the possibility of a church, but some kind of longer-term entity than an LLC, because an LLC is great for short-term, like multi-year. When I mean short-term, multi-year legal transitions, but it's been one of our primary teachers, the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center folks. They are held in an LLC, and they're realizing also that that's got a bit of a time horizon on it. And so it really depends on how you want to be with the land. And do you want to take the land out of the market forever? Do you want to have your design based upon a stewardship model that does no longer commodifies the land as a saleable thing? Of course, you can tell where I stand on that. I definitely prefer models that remove the land from speculation in perpetuity. But if you intend on doing that, then you have to create something that will steward the land in perpetuity, and that's a pretty exciting legal thing, and that's what we did with the Community Land Trust. And so that's a really powerful thing to do, and the LLC doesn't really accomplish that as elegantly. And so because you can imagine the complications of after you die, what happens to your share and the relationship with your heirs and the stability of the community and the vision of the community, because your heirs may or may not be people who want to or even should be living in that community. So I'm gonna pause and see what questions have emerged from all this stuff that I've said, and see where we want to take this conversation.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions. So a number of people had questions about the 2 LLC models that you just described, and going more in detail into that.
Okay.
But earlier on, there was a question when you were talking about that ideal group size of a small group, and someone asked, how do we balance our small numbers? This person has 8 people in their group now. How do they balance that small number with needing more members and financial input to lower the individual costs and financial commitment? So anything more you can say about how you want your community to grow, but then how to have it be small for that land acquisition process?
Okay, well, I want to make sure I understand the question. So how do we balance the keeping the group small with the fact that we actually need more money or more energy to pull it off?
Yeah, I think so.
I can speak to that as well if you guys are willing. I asked.
Oh, great. Question. Yes. Go ahead.
Would it help to have more elaboration?
Oh, you asked the question?
Yes, ma'am.
Sure. Yeah. Great. Elaborate.
Yes, we're a group of 8 people. Our budget individually is not very strong, but of course, as is often the case, we have high dreams. And we also have a community of people that we can draw from for more membership.
Yep.
But we're aware of the risk of getting more people involved. Already 8 feels like a lot for kind of managing, like you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
But we're thinking, okay, if there are more people involved in this project, we can divide the costs out more, and it will make things a lot more affordable. So I'm wondering what options there are for creating that affordability without, spreading thin our sense of ownership and core members and the simplicity that comes with that.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's great. And I'm hearing that you haven't yet landed, like you're in the finding land phase, the coming together as a group, but needing to raise funds to acquire land. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the design challenge in that without knowing what you can actually offer people with the land, I think is part of the challenge there, because you could, if you knew that you could say, we're going to have X number of tiny houses in our village, but we're going to have one that's the offsite member tiny house, and you can all, people could have like a kind of a membership that's a visiting, get to be part of the community, but not live in the community full time, come to the parties, come to the work parties, maybe if you're going to be doing other things, you grow food or whatever, like there's like some sort of exchange. We sort of see it as concentric circles and inside of our membership sphere. And so the maybe your 8 in the center you can make it super clear what it is that you need to retain in terms of decision-making capacity to actually guide the project. But then you could create a membership tier for people who believe in what you're doing, who want to see it happen, who are your next ring of friends, and you can make it super clear what the reciprocity is inside of that membership band. And then you could have another one out there too, potentially. I mean, I'd have to know more about like what your vision is, where you're going with this, to know what your sort of business plan would be and what you could promise people if it all comes to pass within those outer circles around the center team. But I think it's common, meaning there's a lot of us who are noodling on that exact same design challenge that you're having, and I think that membership, is really the hack. I think for a lot of our projects is different levels of membership in the what we're doing, and to realize that there actually is a reciprocity. Some people will want to like tithe or pay into the center of the project without a lot of tangible reciprocity, other than knowing that they're like following your journey and getting a blog post and knowing that they're part of what it is that you're doing and they're excited to believe in you, but I think setting up a reciprocity for each band of membership and making it really clear why you need to keep that inner circle cooking, and small. Does that like go deep enough for you, or is that, have you already thought of all those things?
We're aware of the as you said, concentric circles and like membership tiers aspect of it, and where we're still lacking is in awareness of how does that combine with the legal entity aspect. Like where do we find cohesion between what we could spin up very quickly, membership tiers, and what decision making looks like in that way, and then the legal and financial on paper works, zoning and all this stuff that we don't know very much about yet.
Yeah. Where are you guys?
We're split between Portland, Oregon, and we're open to looking at land in the Pacific Northwest, but we also have a contingent in Asheville, North Carolina, who are kind of interested in looking in that area as well. So,
Cool. Well, you do, I think one of your problems is the fact that like tiny houses, as smart and as much sense as they make, don't actually, like in a lot of municipal circumstances, don't register as yet enough on their legal radar. And so part of the challenge there, unless you actually find a land that is like a trailer home park or a campground, or something that has a use permit that either already exists or that you could get one, so that your tiny home village is fully legal. One of your challenges is going to be sort of selling memberships into something that has a root level risk inside of it. And so I'm not sure what your plan about like on the radar, off the radar is, because I think that also ties into how ties into the your design.
Yeah, I think we're having the conversation right now about on and off the radar. Some definite plans are kind of, to put it vaguely, retreat center functionality. We're going to be operating in a business together and doing educational things together as a community. So that's a big aspect, and that might contribute towards, how up to code we need to be.
Well, if you have a whole retreat center game plan in your, like, that's what you're angling towards, then you generally are going to need to get, in our county, it's called a conditional use permit. And so you would need to get the use to be able to do what it is that you're wanting to do, because you don't want to advertise that and put the word out about it and have it and have yourself be vulnerable to putting so much investment in something that could get undermined by legal issues. And so one of the things that comes up is, in the property search that I would imagine you would be on is definitely this piece around what is the best match within, if you can zero in on where you want to do this, whether it's Portland or Asheville. I know there's like a trade route for sure across the country between some of these places. You may want to evaluate even that could be a major reason why you chose a place, is because they were more friendly to, the county was more friendly to what you're wanting to do, because that your endeavor is a big one, as you know. And so I think you could even are you already an LLC? No? LLCs are really handy and can be like moved around. So even if you decided that you wanted to form something else to be your long-term title holding thing, an LLC may actually be a nice place right now where people felt like they were contributing money into something that had a legal basis, and you could set that up. I have some awesome legal, in fact, that should be another one of the FIC, one of these things that we do, Cynthia, is bring some of the lawyers who are hip to this, because I work hand in hand with multiple lawyers that are actually, my closest one prefers to be called an attorney. So multiple attorneys who think like us, like they're culture hackers like us. They're figuring it out. And so, like you can absolutely set up those different membership tiers to be tied to different levels of financial, both risk and reward within the project that you're doing. The people that are putting in all this sweat equity, like you are going to need to have a higher, we need to get out of thinking about everything in such a financialized way, I think, but definitely still getting that there's a cycle between what you put in and the risk you take, and then also what you receive. And so, you can use an instrument like an LLC to create that kind of flexibility in your project.
So Cassandra, there's a lot of questions in the chat, and a lot having to do with like asking more about the nuts and bolts and legal structures and zoning, use permits, like a lot of the terms that you mentioned, people wanting to understand more what they mean, and like the best practices for, for starting an intentional community. And And some people have also asked about your community in particular at Landwell. You had mentioned a little bit about the structure you're using there, but maybe that could be a good example, you know, because we would think you've picked a good structure that works for your group, and maybe just to get an insight into how is it set up currently there.
Well, sure. And one of the things that I wanted to share is that when you cross the threshold of acquiring land, you generally then have to deal with the wealth disparity that's in your group, and that is sometimes, you know, I can't think of a group that I've worked with that there wasn't wealth disparity with the group. And lots of people have tried to create equal, you know, buy-ins and whatnot, but unfortunately, land at this point costs. In most places we want to live, like, costs a lot, and so it really requires people who have deeper access to resources, usually through family inherited wealth, and in some cases in our area here, people did startups and had good exits in the Silicon Valley situation, but we're oh, it just told me my internet connection is unstable. Am I good?
You're good. We can hear you.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, cool. So most of us have this wealth disparity situation. And so in our community, one of the couples that was in our group had the capacity to act quickly. We had an opportunity to get this land before it went on market. And so I would say, you know, so let me just break down a few of the pieces of this that I think are applicable perhaps across the board. And that is that, you know, on one hand, you are looking for a bit of a needle in a haystack, like in terms of looking for land that lets you do what or the zoning allows you to accomplish the not only the number of people that you want to live there, but most of us don't get to do the kind of building that we want to live. There's so much about a sustainable, regenerative lifestyle that is currently not legal, as much sense as it makes. To do these things, they are not legal at this point. It's just criminal at this stage. But here we are in the crime scene, all of us rolling up our sleeves to get it going. So how do we do that? And so there's different ways, and it really depends on kind of like what your character and constitution is. Like, some people just really want to kind of not be regulated, and you either need to go to the woods and be off the radar and like natural build everything and I know a community that does this. It's actually a couple of them locally where nobody knows what they're doing out there, and that is a very vulnerable place for your community. If you want to live like that and not feel vulnerable, you have to go to like the Midwest. You have to go to places where the zoning codes and the building codes don't restrict you as intensely, so choosing your location of where you want to do your thing. But if you're in California or, you know, coastal places and coastal places where the population is high and the land is really valuable and people really want to live there, you're looking for land that has generally a pre-existing use. Somebody who did something before you that looks something like what you want to do, enough like it that you can convince the local authorities, which are often county authorities, because if we're dealing with bigger pieces of land, so if you're within the urban growth boundary of a city, you deal with the city. If you're outside of that, you're dealing with whatever county you're in. And when you're in that, outside of the urban growth boundary of a city, you're also dealing generally with wells and septic systems. And so how you're getting your water and how you're dealing with your waste, like entirely like define what is possible within the county that you're working with. And even if you're like, oh, but we're rainwater and gray water and composting toilets and all that stuff. Remember what I said about all that stuff not being permitted or legal for the most part, then you, even if you're going to do some of that stuff, hopefully without getting permits because you can't, you still need to front to the county and work with the county's regulations. And generally, you know, the strategy is to look for property that that already has something going on. So this Landwell had 6 legal dwellings. That was like, whoa, what? That that it almost didn't matter what shape the dwellings were in. You know, that it had living water and 22 acres of farmland and 6 dwellings was like, oh, like that's amazing. So other projects I've worked on have other conditional uses that pre-existed. Campgrounds, great for retreat centers, already existing retreat centers, trailer parks, and so yeah, you gotta work with a real estate agent who can understand, or a local consultant who can help you understand what the rules and regulations of your county are, how they're going to limit you. And then there's another piece I'll say, and then we'll go back into conversation about this, is that there's a whole strategy with how you then go to work with that municipality. And depending upon where you're at and what the general political is and what people are up for is going to determine how much you can actually push that municipality towards the regenerative future. Some of them actually have it in their general plans that they're supposed to do really important stuff relative to affordable housing or water or unique septic systems, or like they're supposed to do that stuff. And you could partner with them and you could say, hey, we're going to partner with you to help create, you can come and monitor what we're doing, and we'll together, you know, move this in, we'll move this dial forward together. That can happen. There are counties who are down for that and realize that they need to put their attention on that. And then you become more of a partner in it, but it takes time because you're really in the bureaucratic framework, and you need to be willing then to pay for the consultants and to do the studies and all of that work, some of which you could raise funds for if you don't have the funds, but you could raise funds because people want to see those things happen in most of our communities. So
good. So I think we might change it up a little bit, because a lot of these questions are longer and kind of nuanced and somewhat case specific. So maybe if instead we could open it up for a voice or two to share verbally the question. So if folks could go, if you have a question that feels like really pertinent and maybe pertinent to the wider group of people here, to go to your participant screen and click the raise your hand button. And then I can see on you and call on you. And then we can have some time for more Q&A that way. Okay, so the first hand I see is Paul. Paul, you want to unmute and share your question with Cassandra?
Yes, thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So the big challenge so far has been not so much finding prospective members, but finding prospective founders. Right now I'm a one-man show, and a lot of the skills that are required are above my pay grade. So that's the area I really need help in. So do you have any suggestions on other than just general marketing, Facebook groups, YouTube, things like that? How to find people who are really interested in building a community and getting one off the ground?
mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I think that it's really important how it gets started. And so it depends on, like, depends on what kind of community you want to build though. Like if you really want the kind of community that comes off the ground with a founders group who really work well together. You know, sometimes people come together and it's more like a business, and they aggregate because they can tell they have different skill sets and different connections. And so they're like, they identify like, well, I'm the farmer archetype, and I'm the investor archetype, and I'm the, you know, event organizer archetype. And they like recognize that they come together and they form a team, which is more like businessy. And then when you end up living together, it ends up being something that, where you didn't realize, oh shit, that was cool that you had those skill sets and that seemed complementary to me, but I actually don't know how to live in community with you. So I think what I would recommend is for you to think through your own how you want to move in the world. And if you're wanting to do something that is more like with people who don't know each other very well, then that might be better for a co-housing community, or that there's specific community tracks that style can work better for. But if you're actually really wanting to do something that's like, okay, me and these 4 people came together, or these 2 other people, and we did this, that's going to be really based on heart connection. That's going to be based on really liking to spend time together, because when you're building a community, you have to spend like a lot of time together. And there's a lot of people who think they want to live in community, and they actually aren't well suited or up for the challenge of living in community. And there's a lot of people who think they want to build a community because it sounds like so exciting and it's so needed. But at the end of the day, they actually don't have like the time or the emotional wherewithal to go through the teamwork stuff. So I would almost go to like, not just like network on social media, but I would go and see if there's people who are in nonviolent communication practice groups, or like groups that are actually driving relationship in person deeper in the locale that you're in. Like go into places where people are doing that depth work, and start to become like practitioner and friends with them, and see if they also have a dream of starting a community. So it's really going to be tricky for you to choose and to like go deeper in, if that's the kind of community you want to form. I hope that's helpful, but it's really so relationship based. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be, you could even start hosting, I know this is like maybe a trite idea, but when COVID shifts, you could host, backyard picnics or barbecues, or something where people are eating together. Like if you can get people eating and talking together, then you start to build something that's a cultural experience, because it's not just what we do together, it's really, really how we be together that is like the glue that holds people together through the building and the sustaining of community.
Nice. Yeah, and just so everyone knows, on June 2nd, Jana Ludwig, she's going to give a workshop on how to start an intentional community. That'll have more of that information about starting a community, and I can put that into the chat so you have that link. Great. And we can go next to Dina. If you have a question to share, Dina.
Yes, I'm just starting my video. 1 moment. Hi, thank you. I'm wondering, nice to meet you all. I'm wondering if you've seen any examples of communities where there isn't necessarily a common ideology, or you might have disparate, obviously everyone who's going to be there needs to have some sort of buy-in on basic concepts, but in my part of the country, it's very possible to have people who have very different opinions on things, but nevertheless are all very much about conserving land and living in a less urban environment. Mm-hmm. So if you've seen any examples of that, it would be great to hear what you think has made them successful in terms of organizing principles.
That's a great question. And you're talking about like people actually sharing land, like living and sharing, and not just being neighbors who are have a similar love of taking care of the land where they live.
Correct.
But, yeah. You know, it's challenging to come up with an example actually of that, because the you know, I think the closest thing in some ways that comes to my mind is sort of like the friendly landlord community type of situation, where the ownership and the ultimate power lines are actually established, like the structure of that is established, and then the people can have, you know, landlords have multiple houses, that they sort of have a friendly community feel to it, and those people, you know, do some neat things relative to land stewardship together, but not necessarily have to agree on how to share equity, how to share power, how to, you know, make really big decisions that have to do with their safety together.
That's exactly what I'm envisioning, actually, is what you're saying.
Okay, yeah. So because when you have such disparate ideologies, but you're actually having to make decisions that impact, that are like super high stakes decisions relative to one's own security, it's really tricky.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good. And next we have Annika.
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 Yes. Hi.
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 Nice to see you.
I know. I want to be under that tree with you. But I wonder if you can say something or speak to converting privately owned land to community owned.
Yeah, that's my favorite thing. So you mean just like generally or specifically, like what?
Yeah, like selling like privately owned land and then like selling it into like a community-based model, or like, you know, what does that process look like?
Okay, so you mean if you were to buy something privately and then sell it, and then sell shares of it into cooperative type or a community model?
Yeah.
Like that?
Yeah.
Okay. You know, there are people who have successfully done that, and personally, those are like my heroes, because that's the kind of Robin Hooding, or like, you know, sometimes it's just a really important role. And so, one of the stories that I love is Mariposa co-housing in, do you know that story, Annika, in the East Bay? I know you spent some time in the Bay Area, but Mariposa, it's not actually, well, it has some co-housing elements, but it was bought as a private, you know, it was a multi-unit place in an urban environment, and it was bought privately. And then it went through a conversion process into a community land trust with a co-housing development on it. And the person who bought it worked with attorneys and slowly like made it so that they got out of the private ownership situation, and didn't do it as a big profit play, but you know, I'm sure recouped expenses so that he could go do that again. And so so there is, you know, when people go into situations like that, it's really important what their motivations are, because if somebody's buying private property and then trying to convert it to a community, and they're using a commodification of the asset model, then it's going to be really expensive generally for people to buy into that community, and it's going to be yeah, and then it's driven, you know, it's driven by a profit motive more than necessarily a community glue. So I think it's really important for the person who's doing that work to also have a circle of people who they highly respect and sit in counsel with, to help them understand how to do that in a way that actually transitions power, because that's also a really tricky thing, is for the person who's buying the private property, in order to, you know, to do this conversion. Like a lot of times they can get a little bit diluted by the fact that they still have the power for a while. And so how to support them into the circle, because even that person generally wants to be welcomed into making really wise we-based decisions that aren't just I decisions. But it's, there's lots of different legal structures that could, that conversion could, be supported by. So there's, there's two of them that come to my mind. The top two are do convert into community land trust. But you could also do it like we're doing it right now with the LLC, with two LLCs, and we're inside of a multi-year, Landwell's inside of a multi-year conversion from private property to cooperative stewardship. And and it does take a lot of work. Do you want to talk about that? Like, did I speak into that, or was there more you wanted to?
No, that's good. Yeah.
Okay, so next we have someone who's called Land-Based Community. And then Lee, you're on deck.
Hi, Cassandra. It's Darren Miller. Thank you for your time.
Hi, Darren.
The question I have is, we have a group of 30 to 50. Hi, Cassandra. So we have this group of like 30 to 50 friends who have been meeting every few months for the last year to discuss the dream of starting a land-based community and all that go into that.
Yeah.
And my curiosity is, as we're going to actually move this, who's motivated to move on it? We're wanting to define that, but also to include the people who we resources, the time to put into being in that inner circle, but who we don't want to like exclude from the project or be making choices that maybe wouldn't be interesting to them in the long term. And I guess I'm wondering if you have any advice on how to sort of include that second ring in the best way that doesn't slow down the most inner circle working group from making choices, but yet includes that second ring of people who we love but aren't going to be in a working group.
Nice. I think I got that. That was a little bit of a wild ride with your audio going fast and slow. But I'm pretty sure I got the gist of it, that you're like 30 to 50 people. You realize that in order for this to happen, you're going to need an inner circle that's a working group that has agency to be able to like move forward and be agile together as a group, but you don't want to leave your larger circle behind in your process, and you want to be able to create inclusionary loops that support the work of that inner circle rather than like drag them down.
Exactly.
Okay. Great question. And so I think that what came to mind immediately was actually to get on a seasonal rhythm with the whole crew. And I know you guys, and I know some of you, and I know that seasonal rhythms are totally your thing. And so if there was a way that you could align the cyclicity of the work moving forward with some seasonal cycles and have that inner circle really feel empowered. Like, I think that what is most important is that you come together on your vision and values, which is this like the central axis that really like orients everybody. And so when those aren't just visions and values about what you want to see, but how you want to see it come into being, because how is just as or more important, I think, these days than what, and so like really how you want to see this come into being. And so because right now this is your community story, like even before you have land, obviously this is a really important phase of your community story. And so for you all to get that vertical axis, that central galvanizing narrative, like super clear, and then that inner circle is empowered to work like within that agreement field, but then to set up seasonal like report back loops, and as you were to get into that, I think you would start to have this rhythm of like, oh, what are the things that we can just move forward on, and what are the things that we really want to make sure that that larger breadth of community like knows about and is excited about and supports us in doing. And I'm also seeing like a bit of a need to culturally work on how leadership feels for the inner circle, like so they don't feel that they're too burdened, that there's some kind of reciprocity in terms of maybe a future sweat equity even, or even a current tithing or something that has them feel like they're not in a burnout phase, or that there's ways that people could circle in from the outside into that, you know, from the outer membranes into that inner circle to keep the fires, you know, to have people feeling healthy. So there's some way to keep those people feeling like they're not over carrying a burden, and also that they feel supported rather than like hindered by the rest of the community. So it's almost like you're setting up a game. And you're like, how do we want to play this game? And how do we want to feel as we're playing this game? Because we want this community that we're creating together to be one of, you know, embodied joy and sacred spirituality, or like whatever the things are. So then like how you go about doing it is also, you're setting up so that you feel that way as you're doing it, as to the best of your ability. And I'm definitely, as you know, not one to just think that this is all a big feel good thing, but I do think that embodied joy does. I'm having to learn that that's part of living a regenerative lifestyle, is that you actually really do find your way to really enjoying what you're doing, even as you're doing hard, initiatory, disciplined, focused endeavors, like starting a land-based community. So I don't know if that was a helpful riff for you, but you know where to find me if you want me to imagine into more of that with you.
Great. Thank you.
Oh, good. All right, Lee, let's go to you. And then Danny, you're on deck. Oh, I will unmute you. Let's see. Go ahead. We can hear you now.
You can hear me now. Hi, just a very quick tree story. I've been in love with Mexico for 12 years and I fled because of the virus. But there was a tree that I had visited there for many, many years. It's called an Ahuehuete tree. It's a very sacred tree. It's 600 to 800 years old. So a couple of years ago, I went there and the whole base was covered with graffiti. My favorite tree in the universe was covered. So I got 6 people from my Qigong group. We came with pieces of sandpaper and we sandpapered off the graffiti, off of the tree, so you never knew that it happened. And this tree is like with me forever. This tree befriended me. I take it in every morning. I bring my favorite animal to the tree and I visit it. So, but that's a preface to the question. Am I a senior? Am I a baby boomer? You know, I'm in Maine now, but I have my eyes on New Mexico because I'm in love with the desert. But I want to know what kind of, there have to be millions of people out there like myself. I'm turning 72, but I have building skills. I'm an artist. I do all sorts of things. But intentional communities and co-housing, how do you buy into these places at $300,000 to $500,000?
Right.
It's impossible. So I'd like to hear some success stories about either blogs that have been formed, someone that might be interested. I did put a chat if anyone's thinking about New Mexico, because actually tiny houses are taking ground there as they have in Portland, Oregon. They're very amenable to it. And there's things before the city council now for tiny housing initiatives.
Awesome.
So what kind of stories you have to tell me? I need some rays of hope.
Okay.
At my age to believe that it's still possible to find 5 or 6 like-minded people to live in the desert with views of sunsets, mountains, and Gila monsters, you know, whatever.
Yeah. Well, you know, thank you for the tree story. And you can obviously tell I'm a tree person, and I am, you know, I guess I get curious about how if there is a little bit of composting of idealism that for you to do that might help you find a way in that feels like this could be great. Like, you know, one of the situations we're now looking at is one of our landmates, his mom is your age and is looking to lift off of, you know, her where she is and get a trailer. And so we're thinking, maybe during the planting season and during a particular time, she loves to work in the garden. She's, you know, it's wonderful to have her here. And so maybe there might be ways that you as an elder could be seen as like a really valuable addition to something that already exists or that is forming, and that you could, you know, be able to you know be flexible, because maybe you don't need a big house and you can plug in different ways. And so I feel like there's you know, it may be challenging to start an intentional community of that scope, when find those people and do all that work. Like that might be a big body of work to start at 72, although I wouldn't put it past you. You seem like you're full of life, so, you know, don't want to discourage you. But I think that there may be some ways of looking at how, especially when you're able to bring your elder energy as like, hey, I want to learn with you guys. I got stuff that I can offer, and you need an elder. Elders are missing very much, you know, from our world. And so, and so for you to be a conscious elder and be able to, you know, to plug in, you could really be a really wonderful addition, I'm sure, to something that's going along, you know?
You know, if I can mention one of the dilemmas, one thing I find myself up against on the ground is that there are many communities that won't accept a person over 57 years old, like Twin Oaks, for instance, because they don't want it to become a nursing home.
Right.
So you're stuck in that dilemma if nobody wants to take care
right
of an aging person. So it seems like you might be relegated to finding people more in your age group and kind of, you know, pushing each other around in their wheelchairs when they're 125, you know, something like that perhaps. So,
you know, I hear that, but and I think that it's kind of I think it goes in different ways, because when there are a lot of elders and they're all aging in place, then yeah, you do have shared needs. And so there are senior co-housing things happening, and there's ways that are really focused on community as a generational, you know, thing. And so, and I think Cynthia put in the chat, there is an elders in community, like I think it's one of the next ones. It's like in 2 weeks or something. So you should definitely join that one and see what people are talking about, because I think it's like, it's different. If there's a bunch of elders who need too much care, like Twin Oaks, you know, it's an income sharing community. So they need a certain number of people. You can't even have a kid there without asking, you know, so there's a carrying capacity to an income sharing community. But I think in other communities, you know, like I'm describing here, we have space for some elders and we can work with that, because that feels like we have the energy and the reciprocity for it.
okay, I'm buying my plane ticket tonight. I'll see you tomorrow morning. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Yeah, and definitely encourage anyone who's interested in that topic to join on May 27th. I put the link in the chat.
Great.
Awesome. Great. So let's go next to Danny.
Hello. I'm not Danny. Danny's here, but I'm Larry or Lars. I have a question. First of all, well, thank you so much. That's been really helpful and really thought-provoking. And I'd like to know if you could talk on when you were like at first talking about like the big questions of our times and like what does repair look like and how deep can it go. And I'm wondering if you could touch on like ways you've seen people addressing these questions in concrete ways or spiritual ways even.
Yeah.
So, and I'm like looking into like colonialism and racism.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. And it's, you know, it's tricky because I know you all want to like the real estate and all the hacking and everything that we need to do. And, you know, I do love that, but the decolonizing conversation is actually like, it's just really got my heart. And so maybe sometime we can do something like where that's what we're talking about for like the whole 2 hours is we're just talking about what that's about. So thanks for resurfacing that. So there's different things, like on an energetic level, it's a lot easier, right? Because you can just begin to make offerings to the land and to the place ancestors of the land, and be in a place where you're at least aligning energetically to desiring to listen and to heal and to be about that repair on a profound level. And so, like, I do a lot of that, right? Like, I just am in the inquiry, but and in the offering and in the listening and in the praying and establishing a direct relationship with this land, and doing my best to allow that land and the place ancestors of this land to not just guide me, but the people that I live with. And then together we listen. And so there's a lot we could talk about that's just really beautiful about that, creating your own sort of orientation medicine wheel, and you know, how to just really drop into your place. And that is, there's decolonization, internal decolonization work there. In terms of really tangible ways, there are people, they're planting justice in the East Bay, gave a portion of their land to the Segorite Land Trust that is working with the ancestors of that land, the Ohlone ancestors. So there's actually you should check out, if you haven't checked it out, in the East Bay, it's called Segorite Land Trust. And so it's an Indigenous women-led land trust. And they're actually giving people an opportunity to pay a tax to that land trust to help with the repair of the sacred sites in the East Bay and the repair of the relations with the Indigenous peoples of that place. And so there's other, you know, one of the communities that I am involved with, that I co-steward, those people who lived there went through a complete process when there were residencies that were open. Like, everybody that applied to live there had to answer questions about how they were doing decolonization work in their lives. And that was like a part of how they got to be considered for that community, is like, where are you in doing this work? And so I'm trying to think of some other, you know, examples. We're going to continue here at Landwell, and there's to look at what is needed, and what do the folks that are still alive, they're trying to repair their culture and their relationship to the place after all the colonization that's happened here. How can we, if any way, help in that? And for some folks, like here, there's also a preserve that's completely just opens it up to the Wapo and Southern Pomo people to do to tend their sacred plants, and to go and harvest the plants, and to work with the plants directly, even if it's not about an ownership, it's about an access. And so I think there's lots of different ways that, you know, I'm on a class right now where I'm learning from a woman named Desiree Harp, who is actually a descendant of the original peoples of the lands where I live. And she's, you know, she's giving us a lot of access to her thinking about, you know, about what it's like to be her right now. And so I think it's a long road. And so I feel like there's a piece about just really being in the process, and not being like having to rush to the answer, but to continue to listen and to learn and to find ways to plug in where you're at, to just to really be willing to be in that conversation and to not know the answer, but to be available to be in relationship. And I think we have so many security, and we get into this like right, wrong thing. We're like, oh, well, if you're talking about decolonization, you're talking about giving the land back. And, you know, and some people do, like, they're like, yeah, I can give the land back. But then sometimes there's nobody that can steward that land. There's nobody that is left who can actually do what it, you know, like hold in that land. And so maybe giving the land back isn't even always an option. So it's more about really engaging in the learning, both personally and as a community, and then in your bioregion, like what efforts are underway and how can we be part of them. Does that speak into that?
Come again?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
I took a lot of notes. Yeah, I think a lot of like people were like from settler descent talk about owning of land and property, and who are like radical political people and feel a lot of like I don't know, dissonance, and like there's a lot of layers there, and I feel like there has to be many more questions, and of course this can be like answered in the scope of a Q&A. But
right, yeah, no,
yeah,
it's a big body of work, because yeah, it's like I just so personally like feel dedicated to helping the land get into council-based stewardship, which is often could be indigenously informed, even just the notion of not owning it and being in a stewardship council about that listens to the land. Obviously, that's what like I think a lot of our First Nation brothers and sisters would want for the land too, you know, because that's where the land started. So
thank you.
Good. So just a little time check. We have about 10 minutes left, and lots of people still with their hands up with questions. So Cassandra, do you want to take just like a few more? And
sure.
Then, okay, all right. So next on the list is Jonathan, and then Jay, you are on deck. Jonathan, are you with us? Do you want to unmute? We still can't hear you. Oh, I see. Okay. For some reason, it's not letting me unmute you. Okay, go ahead. We can hear you now.
Great. So my question goes back to the structures about the LLC. There's been a lot of discussion in our group about cooperatives and condominiums.
Mm-hmm.
And what it seems to ultimately boil down to is A, a question of trust, and B, a question of who makes the decisions and how we agree on kind of general sets of rules for doing that without getting lost in the kind of incredible process stuff that's all associated with sociocracy and so on.
Is that a question or a comment?
That was my question. How you mentioned about LLCs. That seems like a private enterprise, you know, hierarchical decision-making system, as opposed to a co-op, you know, in which people can be equal, even though they're putting in different amounts of money, which, you know, some people may feel nervous about because they're at risk more than others. And then there's all this kind of getting lost in the process stuff. And I'm trying to figure out what's the best way to have people participate without, you know, just kind of bringing the process to a standstill or going around in circles, but actually getting some stuff done.
Yeah, So I want to clear something up. Thanks, Jonathan. The LLC is not intended, we do not use it because it's a hierarchical corporate structure. Like it is actually, we use it because it helps flatten us into a membership. And so it can certainly be used that way, but it's a really flexible legal tool. And so just to be clear, you can also disaggregate your shares in the LLC from your voting rights in the LLC. So just what you described with the cooperative, you can also have that sort of dilemma inside of the LLC. But yeah, cooperatives are much more involved legal form that I actually know less about for sure. I feel like they're much more used inside of worker-owned economic framework, and I have not seen them, at least at the scale of land projects that I have been working on. HOAs, yes, that is definitely a hack. I want to say, if those of you who aren't familiar, there's a lot of legal tools aggregated at the Sustainable Economies Law Center. And so I think it's just selc.org, but they've definitely, it's California, but I think that it's helpful for people all over the place. And so I think, what you're speaking to, Jonathan, about getting dragged down into process and like, okay, what's the actual cultural experience we want to have together that also includes accomplishment. So not just going around and around, but that it includes accomplishment. So this is the dynamic tension. And having a conflict resolution process that allows for conflict to be held in a way that is productive, so that it then actually feeds the feeling that you're moving forward together, rather than continually stalling out because there's all this stuff for people coming up that they don't actually know where exactly to put it. So they're going to just drag the group process down because they're continually not feeling either heard or safe or whatnot. So there's, I think, probably a need for acknowledging that people need to talk to get clear on what their agreements are and what they feel safe about, but to do that within a structure that also doesn't become a quagmire. So, and I don't know that there's a one size fits all, because I think some people would say once you started practicing sociocracy and you actually did it, then it wouldn't bog you down. And I'm not advocating for that as like the way, but I know communities who use that, and yes, they needed to all get trained, and yes, they needed to get used to it. But once they got used to that structure, then it actually enabled a lot of functionality and forward momentum for the growth of their community. So I think it can feel really challenging when you keep going around, when you're trying to decide how to decide, and you're like, okay, let's get over a threshold and actually say this is the structure we're going to exist in, and then we're going to give it a go, and then we're going to evaluate it after 3 months or 6 months or whatnot, and if we need to, address it, but we're actually going to hold ourselves to it. And if you're not disciplined enough to do that, there may be some stuff, some emotional content inside of the people or the group that is going to drag you down no matter what until you address it. So I don't know that there's any simple answer to your question, but it's again, if you people are showing up to this, that's what I said at the beginning, people are showing up to this with a lot of dreams and their own ideas, and also a lot of trauma. And so, sometimes people need a support group, and they go to an intentional community forming group and treat it like a support group. And so they may need a support group. You may need a support group. You all might need that, but that may not need to show up at the meeting where you're needing to make decisions. But if that trust isn't there, then it's going to thwart the process no matter what. So I think you got to look at it head on and get it into the right the right container for the kind of process you want to have.
Great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Great. Good. So I want to let everyone know, because a bunch of people have been asking me, that I will send out in a follow-up email the recording of this call and a copy of the chat feed. So you will have the chat, and I know the chat has been really rich with questions and offerings and contact information, so that's wonderful. Yeah, and Cassandra, how are you feeling? Do you want to do one more question before wrapping up, or do you want to wrap up now?
Yeah,
one more
question and then put a wrap on it. Yeah.
Okay, so Jay, that's your
Thank
time.
you. I'll try to be real quick. Most of us, many of us, need to access conventional real estate financing in order to buy land or buy a home. And I can go to my credit union and get a mortgage for a condo or for a home or for land that I want to build on, but probably not, I'm assuming, to buy shares at an LLC.
Right.
So I'm wondering what hacks or ideas you might have for navigating the way to use conventional real estate financing for individuals who want to be a part of a community.
Yeah, Jay, it's one of the biggest impediments is exactly what you're pointing to. And I know multiple folks are actually trying right now to create funds for communities so that we can have fractional ways of borrowing money to help get into communities, or that communities themselves can have financing mechanisms where they get to be transparent about what they're doing, and that the lending body is actually, I'm hoping in the next few years we're going to see lending bodies that are actually in full support of what we're doing. Like they actually want what we're doing to be what they're funding. And so I think that we're getting close to that, but right now, how it worked for us is we went with a commercial lender because we had 6 legal dwellings. So when you're over in California, when you're over 4 legal dwellings, you can get a commercial loan, and a commercial loan will work with an LLC. And so, I'm hearing that it's possible that some private mortgages will also work with LLCs, but it's less common. And so what often people will do is they'll still form, there's just a lot of working around so that the people who qualify for the mortgage, the smallest number of people who are needed to acquire the property, qualify for the mortgage together, and then they're the title holders, and then they get into a more complicated legal arrangement with the people who they're actually building the community with, and the people who want to be putting in money in other places and in a bunch of time and sweat equity, and then have a more nuanced legal agreement than a bank can deal with right now. And so that's kind of what we're doing, at least at this moment in time, but hopefully that'll change soon.
That makes sense. I know one community in Hood River, Oregon, they actually hired a developer, and the developer has an architect, and the developer has access to developer financing.
Right. If you're going at scale, like
civilians have no idea. Downside to that is their costs are really, really high to buy into their communities. A 3-bedroom is like $600,000. And
completely. Yeah. No, that scale of thing is totally happening. It's just not that accessible to people.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Well, we did it. We talked about land and community for a couple hours. Yay! Yay. All right. Well, let's actually have what we did at the beginning. Let's just unmute everybody, and unless Cynthia, you want to say something before I let the horses out of the stalls, but just
I want to say a big thank you to you, Cassandra.
Oh, yeah.
So much appreciation. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you for everyone who joined and donated, and thank you for your support of FIC and coming along with us as we launch this event series. It's so wonderful to have your support. Thank you.
And what Cynthia said about Mark Lakeman being like maybe more like urban oriented, Mark Lakeman is not to be missed no matter where you live, no matter you live on the moon or in Georgia or rural or wherever, like go to Mark Lakeman's talk next week. He is awesome. And thank you, Cynthia. Thanks, FIC. Thanks everybody who came here today. And if you want to unmute yourself and we can all just Yay! Together.
Thank you so much. Good luck, everyone. Beautiful. Fabulous.
Oh,
He's a boss.
Blessings on all of your journeys. We got
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cassandra.
Thank you. Nice to
Thank
see
you. Nice meeting y'all.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Take care.
Good luck, everybody.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Thanks to everyone.
Thank you.
Blessings, everyone.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone. I came late. I'm glad I got here.